Our project was about implementing LSTM variants for textual entailment. Our main purpose of the study is to solve the textual entailment problem, which is essentially to classify a sentence pair, determine if one sentence entails, contradicts, or is neutral to a given premise sentence. This task by nature suits the style of supervised learning quite well, and general steps towards solution would be to represent the sentence pair and then classify this representation. As classification or vector representation is relatively straightforward, most of the work on this task is about representing the sentence pair, and this would be our focus as well. In our implementations, we use simple multi-layer perceptron to serve as a downstream classifier following the sentence pair representation. We have implemented 4 types of models, and these are a CNN with individual encoding, an LSTM with individual encoding, an LSTM with conditional encoding, and finally an LSTM with an attention mechanism. As we've mentioned before, the main difference between different models are how they represent the sentence pair. Even though they are really 3-class sentence pair classifiers, we call them by their constituent parts that do the sentence pair modeling. The first model is the LSTM with individual encoding. This models each sentence as a vector using sequence-to-sequence learning with LSTMs. As illustrated in the diagram, it encodes the premise and the hypothesis separately as dense fixed-length vectors, then concatenates these vectors as the final representation of the sentence pair before feeding it into the classifier. Then there's the CNN with individual encoding. As we have argued in the report, we experiment with a CNN-based model as it might be less expensive than an LSTM-based model for this task. We believe conducting the comparison under the simplest setting helps show the difference between CNNs and LSTMs. As a result, we only implemented the CNN-based model with individual encoding to compare to the LSTM individual encoding model. These two share the same procedure of representing the sentence pair. We can see in the graph that what it does is to model each sentence as a fixed length vector using convolution and pooling operations. It then concatenates them and feeds it into the classifier. Another version of the LSTM-based model is the LSTM with conditional encoding. In contrast to individual encoding, when we do conditional encoding, the representation of the hypothesis is conditioned on the representation of the corresponding premise, in the sense that the memory state of the LSTM modeling the hypothesis is initialized by the last cell state of the LSTM which modeled the premise. At last, we implemented word-by-word LSTM with attention. Instead of encoding the input sequence as a single fixed context vector, the model learns how to generate a vector based on context for each output timestep. After the first LSTM encodes the premise, we preserved all the outputs at every timestep to calculate the attention between the premise and the hypothesis. When we encode the hypothesis with the second LSTM, the model takes every word or phrase in the premise into account by generating the attention weight vector. Finally, the sentence pair representation is calculated with a nonlinear combination of the last output vector of the hypothesis encoder and the last attention weight vector on the premise. Now we introduce the experiment setup, which involves the word embeddings and how we train the models. Instead of building our own vocabulary by simply mapping words to the positions in the text where they appear, we decided to import glove word embeddings, as the vectors reflect the relationships between the words. We only compare the performance of the best model within each type. Namely, for each type of model with distinctive structure, we pick up the set of hyperparameters with the highest accuracy by grid search, then plot their accuracy scores. The hyperparameters we searched over are batch size, dropout rate in the classifier, the learning rate, and the hidden layer dimension in the LSTM layers. Finally, we have the results. The graph shows the accuracy on the test set at each epoch. The LSTM-based model showed much better learning effectiveness, as the CNN-based model is essentially just extracting n-gram features in the sentences. However, the LSTM model generally takes longer than the CNN-based model with reasonable size. Also, changing from individual encoding to conditional encoding increased the accuracy by a significant amount. This was as expected, as the final representation possesses more integrated information about the sentence pair. Using word-to-word attention increased the accuracy again on top of conditional encoding. However, more hyperparameters in the attention model led to the zigzag pattern in the plot as it became harder to train and generalize. This was our project. Thanks for watching.